Started by giving infinite praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, Bashem Rachak Kwadash. I like to say Shalom, Wa Shem Kabad, God Walla Rachab, Zaquayim Nawa, Wa Shala Yakim Nawa, which of course is double honors to our elders and apostles of Great Millstone. And Shalom Wa Barakim Labakayim Shal Yasha Allah, which is peace and blessings unto the elect. I'm the brother Dawud Dow from the DC Church, back with another short lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. And Lord's will, I'll entitle this something along the lines of Rome 2.0 will eventually fall. All right. Rome 2.0, of course, being Babylon, aka United States of America, will eventually fall. And the reason why I entitled it that is because what we're seeing manifest, in real time is basically the same way how ancient Rome fell. All right, was a spreading thin of their military. All right, they had such a large empire that it was hard for them to basically man all fronts of their borders. You see, and when you fast forward that to modern day 2026, United States, United States has the most embassies throughout the world. All right, and their military, although they're heavily funded, they're pretty spread thin, which is why they're trying to get these other countries, as you can see in this article right here, countries like Spain and, all of these European countries to aid them in this war. You see, they want to use their bases and they want, essentially they want them to help them, But I'm gonna go ahead and get into this, and Lord's will this be edifying. I also pulled up something in chat, which we're gonna get into that as well. But I'm gonna go ahead and read a little bit of this. It says, this is from jacobin.com, and that's spiritual, man. It's for Yaiquab, all right? But it says, Spain shows Europe how to oppose Trump's illegal war in Iran. All right, so it says Donald Trump is angry because Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez hasn't backed the war on Iran. Sanchez's stand is hardly radical, but it seems like it now. It's lucky, but it seems like it now that almost all of Europe has fallen in behind Trump. Okay, in which we know, the small hats, really they're the ones pulling the strings, and they're the ones who control most of the leaders, all right, throughout Europe and really throughout the whole world, all right, because they own, they own these currencies. They have the majority of wealth, and they're the ones who are at the top, pretty much pulling the strings. So it says Pedro Sanchez has done it again. The Spain Prime Minister has once more become the sole voice among major European countries standing up to Donald Trump. It says this time over the war launched by the United States and Israel against Iran. It says the Madrid government has denied Washington the use of bases the Pentagon maintains in Spanish town of Rota in Moran. It says it argues that the unilateral action does not comply with international law, even as it clearly condemns Iran's repressive dictatorship. It says the U.S. president's response was not long in coming. Furious, Trump threatened to break all kinds of relations with Spain and impose trade embargo. However, as both the Spanish government and European Union authorities have pointed out, the United States does not have the ability to impose targeted tariffs on Spain. It says as the country is part of the European Union trade bloc. Okay, so it says the response of the Spanish government, made up by Sanchez's socialist PSOE and the leftist Sumar coalition to the U.S. and Israel's aggression, differs radically from that of the European countries and of the EU itself. It says in the empty, hypocritical language that has become the hallmark of her policies, European Commission President Ursula, I'm not going to pronounce that whole name. It says called for respecting international law after the first bombing. It says, but she remains silent on the illegal nature of the attack and the branded Iran retaliation unacceptable. Okay, so there's quite a bit on this article. The main thing that I wanted to get, or the main point that I wanted to stress, is that, you have these countries who are supposed to be, allies to the United States. All right, Spain, most of the European countries, Spain, Germany, Portugal, Italy, France, um, the United Kingdom, okay, or England, which they're all supposed to be quote unquote allies, now standing up to Trump, and now they're saying that these countries have basically they have a metric to where um, they measure trade deals and things of that nature, and they also measure these countries' faith in the U.S. dollar, and it's at an all-time low. It's at an all-time low. So we see the relationships between these countries, namely the European Union, all right, and these NATO countries, which a lot of these European Union countries are also a part of NATO. We're seeing them turn on the beast, man. I'm still like, we're seeing them turn on the whore. We're seeing them turn on the whore, which that whore, all right, is Babylon the Great. Okay. So real quick, let me see. Matter of fact, let me get this real quick in Thessalonians. This First Thessalonians, Second Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3, it says, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and the man of sin be revealed." All right, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called the Most High, or that is worship, so that he, as the Most High, sitteth in the temple of the Most High, shewing himself that he is God. Okay, so this proud creature, all right, which is Esau, Edom, namely the chiefest of them, which is Amalek, all right. Everybody's seeing their wickedness. All right, it's being exposed. All right, everything's out on the forefront. Okay, they're clearly making illegal moves and doing things that go against international law. All right, but when they do it, it's not a problem. When others do it, it has to be corrected. You see, so they're usurping this sort of dominance with pride and with arrogance, but it's now backfiring on them. Even their own allies don't want to be a part of the things that they're doing. Okay, so it says, continuing on, it says, let's see. I wanted to jump down. Yeah, I'm gonna just jump down to verse 7. It says, "For the mystery of iniquity doth already work," all right, which at that time it was the rulers of the Roman Empire. It says, "Only he who now letteth will let," which is the Most High. All right, he's letting them rule, pursuing, according to Daniel's 4:17. All right, he set it up the basis of men. Okay, which Esau is the basis of men. All right, and the chiefest of them are the lowest of the low. Okay, the most devilish people on this earth, the quote unquote Zionists. All right, the JOOs, the small hats, whatever you call them. All right, it says what? He's letting them rule. Okay, it says until he be taken out of the way. All right, until they be taken out of the way. Okay, and then shall that wicked be revealed. All right, Esau, Edom, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth. And that's what's happening right now, because what we're prophesying, okay, we're preaching the downfall of this place. All right, the scriptures talk about in Jeremiah how these people are wood, and the words that we're speaking is like fires consuming them. Okay, so that's what's happening to Esau society, because we're bringing out the truth. All right, all of the lies have been, pushed out there for ages and years and years and years and years. We've been called conspiracy theorists. We've been called crazy. All of these different things. All right, but now people are actually starting to see a lot of the things that we've been saying. Even other things like the chemtrails, the fluoridated water, the genetically modified foods. All right, a lot of these foods are grown in labs. Okay, you have a lab in New Jersey. All right, it's just all out wickedness taking place in all different aspects of life. Okay, and Esau is being totally and utterly He's being totally and utterly exposed. Okay. It says, verse 8, and the wicked shall be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth. All right. And the spirit of his mouth, too, you know, is adultery, because, scriptures talk about in Second Ezra how what the Lord only let out of his mouth as it had been a blast of fire. Okay. So what that's talking about, out of the mouth of the chariot, all right, there's going to be concentrated fire to physically destroy them. Right now, all right, they're being destroyed spiritually, okay? But that's also going to manifest, all right, in a powerful way when Yahushua returns, all right? And it's going to manifest physically. It says, and shall destroy them, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming, okay? It says, even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all signs, with all power and signs and lying wonders, all right, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of truth, that they might be saved. Okay. So I'm gonna jump to what I have in chat here, and the prompt that I put in here. I said, are there similarities between ancient Roman Empire's downfall and the direction that America is currently headed in as far as war? And it says, yes. Many historians, political scientists, and military analysts have drawn parallels between later years of the Roman Empire and the modern global powers, including the United States. It says that doesn't mean that the outcome will be the same, but some patterns around war, military expansion, and strategic strain are often compared. So here's a few that it has right here. Number one is the military overexpansion, which I talked about earlier. It says one of the biggest issues Rome faced was trying to defend an extremely large empire. All right, it says Rome had thousands of miles of borders to defend, fought wars with Europe, North Africa, and Middle East. Military costs became enormous. Eventually had trouble recruiting Roman citizens, relying more on foreign mercenaries. Okay, so it says United States comparison. It says maintains hundreds of military bases worldwide. They have the most they have the most embassies worldwide. It says has ongoing commitments in Europe and Middle East and in Asia. Large defense spending, 800+ billion per year. All right, they're damn near in the trillions of dollars. All right, they're damn near in the trillions for how much money they spend on defense. All right, how much money America spends on defense. It says strategic pressure from multiple regions, from China, from Russia, from the Middle East. All right, so they're being spread thin. They have enemies everywhere they go. Okay, so number two would be what? Long periods of continuous war. It says the late Roman Empire spent centuries in almost constant warfare. All right, examples would be the Gothic Wars, the Persian Wars, the frontier revolts, and the internal civil wars. All right, similarly, critics say the U.S. has been in a near continuous military operation since World War II. All right, including Korea, Vietnam. Remember, you had the North Korea, South Korean War. You had the Vietnam War. All right, you had the war in Iraq. You had the war in Afghanistan. Okay, you have, and it says what? Counterterrorism operations globally. Okay, so it says long wars can lead to war fatigue, economic strain, and political division at home. Okay. It says rising rival powers. All right. It says Rome eventually faced multiple powerful rivals simultaneously. Okay. Like if this ain't Babylon, if this ain't Rome 2.0, I don't know what the hell is, man. Okay. Because that's exactly what's going on. All right. It says what? The Sassanid Persian Empire. All right, in the east, the Germanic tribes in Europe, the Huns pushing migration westward. It says, for the U.S., analysts point to China rising economically and militarily. All right, China is number one, all right, in technology in the world. Okay, and who knows if China ends up going to war and taking back Taiwan, they could have a monopoly on semiconductor chips, all right, which are one of the most prominent pieces of uh, um, one of the most prominent pieces of um, whatever, of product you can have, for lack of better terms. It's, the words are escaping my mind, but remember, those semiconductor chips are extremely important because they power, servers, they power cars, they power um, your cell phones. All right, everything needs a chip, or basically a CPU. All right, a central processing unit to um, to work. You see, so if they get a monopoly on that, it could be a big it could be a big issue. All right, for America. Okay, it says Russia challenging Western influence. Okay, so you have a lot of issues between still Russia and America. All right, but we know that according to prophecy, Ezekiel 39, which I have it pulled up, that Russia's going to be basically the main character that's going to aid in the downfall of Babylon 2.0 or Rome 2.0. Along with its allies, all right, that it's going to outline in that chapter as well, okay, as well as China, but Russia is really the big player here. So it says regional powers like Iran and North Korea, okay. So it says when a dominant power faces multiple challengers at once, the strategic environment becomes more unstable, okay. So America, yes, is very powerful, but you now have, like the scriptures say in Joel, the third chapter, you have these weak countries that are now saying they are strong, and they're not just saying they're strong. Of course, they're speaking metaphorically, but how that's manifesting in a physical sense is that these countries are gearing up with nuclear arsenal. Okay, they now have nuclear capabilities. All right, meaning that they have intercontinental ballistic missiles that are able to leave from the country that they are in, all right, and make it to the other side of the earth and touch down here in America. Okay, so they are no longer weak. You can't pull, all right, the playing field is no longer the same. All right, you can't bully these countries how you were, because now they can bomb you off the face of this earth, which according to prophecy, that's exactly what's going to happen. Okay, it says internal political divisions during external conflicts. It says another comparison often discussed is internal stability during external wars. All right, and late Rome experienced frequent leadership changes, civil wars between generals, political corruption, power struggles. Okay, and in America, it says what? It says important differences. Despite the parallels, there are also major differences. The U.S. is not an empire controlling provinces. All right, which it doesn't matter, because really, again, the small hats are the ones who are controlling everything. They're the ones who are pulling all the strings. It says modern economy, modern economics and alliances like NATO are very different from ancient geopolitics. All right, it says technology, nuclear deterrence, and global trade drastically changed the dynamics of war. It says Rome also collapsed over centuries, but not suddenly. Okay, and really, the downfall of America started way back, man. It started, I want to say, back, um, back in the early 1900s. When they during the same time when they had the Titanic, they killed off a lot of people, and then they pretty much gave birth to the Federal Reserve. All right, which is when you really look into it, it's privately owned. All right, by the Rothschilds and by these big banking families. All right, and of course, if you look it up, it's gonna say that they don't. All right, but we know who's really the ones who are pulling the strings, because that's what happened. Which I don't want to get too deep into it. I don't remember all the details, and I don't want to say anything, that isn't factual. But I do know that during the time of the Titanic, there were some very powerful people who went on that boat, and it was meant for the boat to sink. so that the bankers who were at shore, all right, which I think it was J.P. Morgan and a few others, could then seize power in a certain sense to fulfill particular agendas. So that's the comparison there between Rome, all right, ancient Rome, and the modern day Rome that we live in today. And here's just an example of their military being spread thin, all right, and they're needing these other countries such as Spain, London, France, and these other countries to also join into this war. Okay. So this is Ezekiel chapter 39 and verse 1, and I'm going to try to cut this short because I know it's been going for a while. Ezekiel chapter 39 verse 1, it says, Therefore, thou son of man, prophesy against Gog and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back. Salaki, I meant to get the 38th chapter. Yeah, this is Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 1, and the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog in the land of Magog, and the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth. It says, in all thine army, horses and horsemen. It says, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company of bucklers and shields, and all of them handling swords. All right, and those modern day swords are really going to be thermonuclear missiles. All right, they're going to be different types of military arsenal. And there's many different types of missiles as well. Many different types of missiles, different types of warheads. And essentially they're all for what? They're all for destruction. All right. The sword is a representation of a tool that's used for destruction or for death. All right. For killing. Okay. So it says Persia, all right, which is Iran, Ethiopia, which is East Africa, Libya, North Africa. All right. Which you see a lot of alliances are being created between Burkina Faso. What's the other countries? I think it's Togo. Basically those a lot of northern African countries, all right, northwestern African countries are making a lot of alliances with Russia. Okay, so who knows, those bases that Russia might have in these other countries, in these North African countries, can be used during the time of all-out war. Okay. And be an asset to them. It says, all of them handling shield and helmet. It says Gomer and all of his bands in the house of Togomar, all right, and of the north quarters and all of his bands, and many people with them. All right, so you're going to have Turkey involved, okay? You're going to have Turkey, you're going to have Iran, you're going to have Russia, you're going to have East Africa, North Africa, all right, as well as China and other big players being involved to support Russia, all right, in this World War III. Okay. So I'm going to jump to this as well. This is Revelation chapter 17 and verse 16. I'm going to just skip down to the point. It says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, all right, which those 10 horns, which I'm going to get the picture right here. All right, 10 horns, you see what, the 7 heads, all right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then you can count the horns. Brothers made this picture very strategic, but each of these 4 have 2. Okay. Then you have 1, 2, 3. All right. You have 10 horns. All right. The main point, okay, is that the 10 horns is what? A representation of the EU. All right. It says the 10 horns represent the common market of the European Economic Community, all right, established in 1958. Today, the ECC is also known as what? The European Union, okay, which these make up the 10 horns, okay. So I'm going to jump back. All right. So these countries are going to what? They're going to hate the beast. Okay. Because remember, before these countries even spread off, Rome was just all one. You know, all of those countries, you know, those Germanic tribes, the Franks, all right, they were all under, you know, Roman rulership at one point. Okay. But then what, they spread out. All right, Esau spread out. Mind you, all these people are just they're all still Edomites. Okay. So they're all of the same people. All right. Nonetheless, they're gonna hate the horde. Okay. They're gonna hate Babylon 2.0. They're gonna hate America. Okay. And it says, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and shall burn her with fire. So we, you know, really, truthfully, we love what Trump is doing. All right. We love what he's doing because he's causing friction between all of these countries. All right. He's moving like the proud devil he is. All right. Essentially, he's making the moves that the Heavenly Father, all right, the Heavenly Father wants him to make. Okay. Because what's going to happen is eventually these countries are going to get sick and tired of him. All right. And it's just going to lead to what? All out chaos, all out war. Okay. So it says, these 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. All right. And that fire is going to manifest physically to what? That thermonuclear fire. So I'm going to get this last precept here. This is 2nd Ezra chapter 16 and verse 13. For strong is his right hand that bendeth the bow. His arrows that he shooteth are sharp, and shall not miss when they begin to be shot into the ends of the world. Okay. So we understand that, you know, those arrows, when the prophet Ezra saw this vision, you know, in his dream, just imagine what he was seeing. He was seeing a thermonuclear missile fly from one end of the earth all the way into the other end of the earth. All right. And that thermonuclear missile, the only way he could describe it was like an arrow. All right. But how you notice is not talking about an arrow, because no ordinary arrow is able to shoot from one end of the earth to the other. All right. So we understand that this is talking about something much greater, something at a larger scale. It's talking about thermonuclear fire. All right. More specifically, thermonuclear missiles. Okay. ICBM missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles. All right. That host a number of warheads within them that are going to cause, you know, cataclysmic destruction. Okay. It says, behold, the plagues are sent and shall not return again until they come upon the earth. The fire is kindled and shall not be put out till it consume the foundations of the earth. Like as an arrow which is shot from a mighty archer returneth not backwards, even so shall the plagues that are sent upon the earth shall not return again. Okay, so Lord willing, this is edifying into the elect. Of course, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai Ba'ashem, Kakadash. Until next time, I like to say, hey, Shalom Akim.